Ray Clark, welcome to Billboard TV, and a rather prolific writer because you've got a book series out, the Imp series, which is not one, not two, but how many?
I think we're now approaching 6, but thank you for inviting me. The Imp series, basically is a police procedural that follows Gardner and Riley, Detective Inspector Gardner and Detective Sergeant Sean Riley, around Leeds in West Yorkshire. I think the interesting thing for me was that the Imp series didn't start as a series. It was never going to be. In fact, it was never going to be a crime novel. I was looking for something new. I was looking to play around with something different, as you always do. And I remember being in Wales with some friends, and we were having a drink. And we started to throw ideas around. We started to talk about things, and I wanted to write a short story about an alternative Father Christmas. So that's really where it all started. It was never going to be a book. And a friend of mine literally threw something at me and said, well, rather than, write the alternative Father Christmas, the character we all know with a nice white beard and whatever, why don't you write something in the crime genre, maybe somebody killing department store Santas? And you suddenly start to think, but the trouble with when you're an author, you suddenly start to think, oh, that's interesting. So I came away with a completely different perspective, started to put that book together, and I realised sort of part of the way through the research and the characters that I was creating with Gardner and Riley, there was more than one book in it. It was never going to be just one book. I wanted this clean living guy who, would eat healthily and try and look after himself, but I had to do something with that. He had to have a problem. He had to have a drawback, we'll say. And so what I set up in the first book was the very first chapter of Gardner having his wife killed in the first chapter, and him feeling responsible for that because he got involved in something he shouldn't have done. So he carries that guilt around with him forever. So Impurity started there. We then went on to Imperfection, was book 2, which was set in Leeds and was set in the Grand Theatre. Book 3 was Implant, and I wanted to do something different, and a lot of people have picked up on the fact that there's a lot of medical stuff in the books, and am I a doctor? And the answer is no, I'm not. And then book 4 was a book called Impression. That only recently came out in June. No medical in that. Basically, we have Gardner and Riley going to a council estate. I suppose really I should cut back here a little bit because the first chapter deals with a woman who's into the police station she's really agitated and her daughter's gone missing, and they have to go through all the procedure of setting things in motion.
Time. So, how much has changed for that, and what have you learnt?
For book 5, it's called Imposition. What's different about book 5 is it's not fiction, it's based around a true story. And I remember taking a phone call from a friend of mine who was an ex-policeman who was working for a solicitor at the time, and he'd been working this case that had taken them 13 years to get the killer. And as it went to court, there was a question asked by one of the jurors the question then went down to the foreman of the jury, who couldn't answer the question, and he passed that on to the judge, and neither could he couldn't answer the question. So they called in an expert, and after 5 or 10 minutes of going through different scenarios, they got their answer and said, well, yeah, it's perfectly possible. And it might, they obviously nailed their man. So I found that absolutely fascinating. It was the comment that the juror made that actually drove me on to write the book. But it was different. I wouldn't say it was more difficult. It was different because you knew that you were weaving the fact and the fiction together. I had to make up a certain amount of the story, but a lot of the story had to be what was going on and what had actually happened.